welcome to the podcast. Today we have somebody from Audience Store on. It's Paul Snook, who's our new Director of Targetcast, which is our CTV product, and he's here to talk all things CTV. Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Gareth. Thanks for inviting me on.
No worries, no worries. So, you just started with us at Audience Store. So could you just tell us a little bit about your new role at Target and the Targetcast brand?
Yeah, sure. So, it's actually week 2 for me at the moment. So, yeah, it's been a great start, and it's been really good kind of meeting the team and working with everyone. But yeah, so Targetcast is pretty much a kind of new platform that sits within the kind of Audience Store family. And really focusing on kind of like the CTV kind of market. So my role will be kind of to cover really brand development, build out a go-to-market strategy, and kind of growth of this product. And really what I'm kind of going to be focused on is kind of raising awareness and usage of the platform amongst kind of like our kind of clients, whether that be kind of agencies or client direct or kind of any of those kind of partners that fall between that I'll kind of be working with them and hopefully, kind of getting great use of our CTV platform.
Amazing. So you were previously at some pretty big CTV names, such as Samsung. So could you tell us a little bit about your career journey and some of your key learnings along the way?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, you're right. Luckily, I have been fortunate to work at a few kind of big names within the kind of they're ever growing and evolving kind of CTV market. I kind of think that, everyone's, like many people, my career kind of history is divided into sort of chapters, and like the programmatic chapter has been the most recent. I think that kind of started sort of way back in 2018 when I joined Freewheel. And that was really before CTV had actually become a kind of thing or was the next hot thing kind of time. So, we were back then was really selling kind of curated kind of marketplaces for online video, whether that be in-stream, out-stream, and then kind of CTV kind of came on while I was kind of partway through my time at Freewheel. But I think that was an excellent grounding really in a video SSP that was, just kind of core focus was on video, from broadcasters or from other partners out there. And that gave me kind of a real solid understanding of the programmatic kind of ecosystem, and then kind of video, but then onto CTV. And I think that kind of gave me kind of a real kind of hunger to kind of have a bit of a deeper dive within a CTV publisher. And I was fortunate enough to get a move over to Samsung at a time when they were building out a programmatic kind of sales team, which was focused on the UK and the EU. And I kind of joined that team, a real kind of key part. That was back in 2021. And that was kind of to really roll out Samsung's CTV app, TV Plus, to kind of, generate kind of greater awareness and usage of that app amongst advertisers. And that's great. And obviously that's still going strong today. And I kind of think that, my career, started way back when TV was just TV. There was no C. So, I kind of worked at Colton Television, first job, top out of university. A real solid grounding in working in the media industry. It was a fantastic introduction, really, into this kind of world. And I kind of stayed around through the merger with ITV and several different roles within ITV, always within the kind of commercial team. Building up to kind of working within kind of, agency sales and trading kind of, £1 million kind of plus deals while I was working at ITV. And then kind of got me to kind of where I am on that path into that kind of programmatic bit. So yeah, kind of got that old school kind of media experience with TV, with that kind of newer programmatic CTV kind of element to it as well. So yeah, I've been pretty fortunate to see both sides of the coin, so to speak.
How did you find that transition, from sort of standard media planning and buying to more RTB and programmatic?
Yeah, it was really eye-opening, interesting. So there's a key kind of like path that I missed out, which was I went to work from ITV to a digital publisher, AOL. So that was the kind of transition. So it's probably almost about 10 years. I was thinking about this before for doing the podcast, just thinking of some things. So I think it was about 10 years ago that I sold my first kind of video deal ID. So, AOL was that kind of formative bit where it's kind of, okay, you've got video and VOD, and then this kind of new programmatic kind of world that was kind of just opening for video. So yeah, that was the kind of central bit, and that was the kind of the next part of the journey. But I think there's lots of knowledge, and there's lots of experience that you can apply from that old world into the new world. And I think, I've kind of been pretty fortunate that I've been able to kind of use those experiences that I kind of generated at ITV, and kind of put them through into this kind of new ecosystem, because lots of the experience and the skills that you learn within TV are still kind of applicable today.
Yeah, I think we were saying yesterday, weren't we, that maybe the programmatic trader of the future is sort of a merge between the traditional TV buyer and the current, programmatic trader. It's sort of a merging of those skill sets, and that's been happening. I mean, obviously, very slowly for the last decade or so, and it's. I think TV is finally sort of ready to make the leap more towards a more programmatic inventory, the same way that digital out of home has. And sort of, I think the old school media channels are slowly coming across, with maybe TV sort of the last to cross the line.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny, wasn't it? What we're talking about, that hybrid experience that almost you need now. So, TV, those old kind of media can give you a great grounding, but yeah, you kind of need to have that hybrid skills and being able to kind of have that experience of both, really. And I think, I've been really fortunate being able to kind of have that old experience and cross over. But yeah, it's so interesting now with companies like ITV, with what kind of they're offering with ITVX and Planet V. There's a lot more. When I was working there, really, we had a kind of VOD platform, but the exposure to it was quite small. But I think now that you can kind of work in those roles and still kind of get that experience that can kind of give you exposure to both sides.
Definitely. You mentioned you'd done some pretty big campaigns then for Samsung. And so could you tell us a bit about some work that you've done recently before joining us, and some work that you're proud of, and why it went well?
Yeah, sure. So, at my time at Samsung, I think there was some real key partnerships that kind of helped deliver, and, kind of with different sort of tech partners, and, just working with kind of partners that were new to sort of CTV. And I think Samsung's that was the first stop, really, that many kind of publishers saw. They're one of the biggest CTV apps. There's sort of 9 million Samsung TV sets in the UK. So they're the kind of like brand that everyone kind of like remembers, or kind of like recognizes. And I think it's fair to say probably the TV Plus app that Samsung have built is really good. Over 180 channels within the UK, and I think that the app is probably ahead of its kind of competitors. So some of the big deals that we were kind of working with were just on some sort of like new kind of new agencies, really. So some of the programmatic kind of direct agencies who had really started to embrace CTV. Traditionally that they'd been working with, say, like video or display, they were kind of opening up to CTV, and kind of, I was able to kind of work closely with them to kind of like, bring on CTV demand to them. So, they were able to kind of sell it through to their clients in a way where traditionally it had just been video and display, and now we were kind of, offering CTV. Similarly, with some of the other clients who I was working with were sort of tech based, so some DSPs. So, working with, the likes of like DV360, Stack Adapt as well, where we were kind of building out new partnerships, given, more like clearing a path so they could have easier access to sort of TV Plus inventory. And that kind of like opened up, more revenue coming into Samsung. And that was kind of quite a big deal. And, some of those partnerships, like with DV360, were unique in terms of like the data that we were sharing back with them. So, we were starting to pass out more data within our bid stream, which, allowed kind of advertisers for the first time really to manage frequency across YouTube and Samsung TV Plus. So, Samsung TV Plus, one of the biggest kind of like TV OEM sort of apps, and then you've got YouTube as well. So being able to kind of manage frequency was really key across some of that. So, kind of putting those initiatives, really listening to kind of what our partners kind of wanted, and then kind of building out, kind of half building out a new product, or finding out what they wanted and working out how we could kind of make it that they could kind of buy our inventory as kind of easy and frictionless as possible.
Amazing. Yeah. And we were discussing this yesterday in terms of obviously in a quite a fragmented space, it can be quite difficult to maybe manage your frequency for a campaign. And I think that's something that you're going to be tackling head on with Targetcast.
Yeah, certainly. Just from speaking to to people in kind of CT who are buying CTV campaigns, and I think kind of managing frequency seems to come up as one of the main issues that brands have at the moment. And I think obviously within CTV that historically, but there's been some issues around kind of managing frequency, or the user experience not being as good as what it should be in terms of like the same ad being served twice, or same ads being served in consecutive ad pods, all that kind of stuff really, which are kind of more teething problems for this early stage of CTV. But I think at Targetcast that we can start to look at solutions that can kind of help advertisers kind of get over those problems.
Yeah, definitely. It would be interesting to see what we come up with there. And just obviously with your background in CTV, I think you're well placed to answer the next question. So, how do you think is CTV is going to change over the next few years?
Yeah, sure. So, obviously, CTV is growing, the usage is growing, isn't it? And, more ad dollars are flowing into CTV and it's following the eyeballs. But I kind of think one of the big things is that CTV will continue to fragment. So audiences are going to be spread across a number of CTV apps. And I think that the number of CTV apps is going to increase, and there'll be new publishers with CTV apps that are going to launch. We probably haven't heard of half of the ones that are going to come, be launched within the next sort of 2 years. So I definitely see that the audiences are going to fragment across more and more publishers. And obviously, we know in the background to that, there's an ongoing decline in linear TV viewing, and I think that's going to continue for most audiences, and probably even those 55 plus audiences are going to slowly start to move more of their kind of viewing into streaming rather than watching through linear. So we're in that market where overall TV viewing probably for CTV is going to increase, and it's going to increase massively. Most of the content that we're going to choose to watch now will probably be streamed, and that will be through a CTV app rather than probably watched through a linear kind of broadcast.
Amazing. So more fragmentation in an already fragmented space. That's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I'm afraid to say, I think that's the way it looks like it's probably going to go.
And building on that, so what do you think the biggest trend in CTV is at the moment, aside from that?
Yeah, well, the biggest trend I see at the moment is like CTV moving into being a performance channel. So I think, CTV typically was probably always thought of as, upper funnel branding, awareness. But I think now, with the advent of some new ad formats that are kind of being released, it seems that, there's a lot of vendors out there now with some really exciting kind of ad formats that TV now is kind of turning into a performance channel. So I think ads are what's really interesting for me is a trend around personalization, shoppable TV ads. I know we don't need another kind of acronym or term, but just found out a new term the other day called T-commerce. So TV commerce, buying stuff through your TV sets, which whether it's kind of QR codes on the screen or linking to a phone, or cross-screen retargeting after being exposed to an ad on TV. I kind of think that's the kind of big trend that I see at the moment, and I think that's a really exciting space to keep watching.
Very interesting. More acronyms again.
Yeah.
Again, a crowded acronym space. So outside of CTV, what other trends are you seeing in the AdTech and sort of media space that maybe our clients should be aware of?
Yeah, for me, it seems to be retail media. So, every year there's a year of one part of media, but for me at the moment, it seems to be retail media that's getting lots of attention. All the large retailers seem to be setting up kind of media networks. This has probably been led by the supermarkets with the vast amount of store card data that they have. But kind of seeing lots of different retailers. And when you look in America and what's happening over in the US, you can see the likes of Walmart, the huge amounts of data that they have. They're kind of setting up retail media networks. They've actually bought a brand of smart TV as well. So, when you can kind of think that they can start to combine, ACR data that they might have, or, the data around users and the store cards that they have, it's kind of really kind of interesting to see how that space is evolving quickly. And I kind of think, what would be interesting to watch as well is sort of how CTV, I know this was outside of CTV, but I wanted to bring it back to CTV. And it's like, how do these retail media networks, how are they going to go and incorporate CTV into the kind of their media plans? Obviously, they're really great at, monetizing or, putting ads around kind of the kind of owned assets of a retail store or a retail brand. But, CTV could be great, referencing back to that kind of shoppable ads trend at the moment. But, kind of TV and then CTV could offer some sort of like closed loop measurement where you kind of can track sales really easily and effectively, across exposed audiences, and then track that back to kind of the store, a store like Tesco's or Boots. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see kind of how that pans out and plays out over the next sort of like 18 months, 2 years, I would imagine.
Definitely. I think obviously that could be positive and negative for CTV as a channel, because obviously programmatic has been performance based for a while. And, obviously that can lead brands to over focus on campaigns or strategies that appear to be performing well based on their sort of metrics and ignoring potentially upper funnel activity. So obviously we had obviously a lot of brands very focused on like remarketing and dynamic remarketing, which makes sense because obviously that's what drives conversions at the end of the funnel. But obviously, once you've maximized that, and if you're not building your as it was cookie pool or number of users that you have to remarket to, obviously then that sort of dries up and it's it cannibalizes itself. So you really need to be driving that fresh traffic. So I guess it could be good and bad for CTV there if it becomes so measurable that they can literally track every sort of action that comes off the back of it, because it may lead to some sort of friction around whether or not they're going to actually spend on sort of brand activity.
Yeah. I agree.
Very good, very good. So, in terms of without giving away the secret sauce, what are your plans for Targetcast then?
Yeah, oh yeah, great question. So yeah, 2 weeks in, well, second week. So still, but we have some really good ideas about how we can build out Targetcast, and from speaking to lots of different kind of people at agencies, obviously there's a few kind of pain points with CTV at the moment. The kind of ongoing fragmentation, obviously, which I've said is going to get even worse. So there's going to be more apps, there's going to be greater fragmentation, audience spread across lots of apps. And I think, we need to kind of work on a way where we can kind of make it easier for our agency partners to access those audiences. So I think kind of bring in lots of those kind of CTV publishers, that audience kind of spread out across lots of different kind of channels, bring those all together to make it much, much, much easier for people to buy an audience that's spread out across several different partners. And I think, obviously, data and, audience identification's kind of big for us. So, what we'd imagine is that, we're going to kind of have, all this CT inventory that we can overlay our kind of like, proprietary data kind of tools to identify those audiences. So we're minimizing wastage, we're going out after an audience and, we're precisely targeting those across CTV, but then also with industry leading measurement. So, probably evolving around, what the incremental reach that we're delivering over above, say maybe a linear campaign, and then kind of reporting all that back as well, and kind of focusing on that, and then also looking at other outcomes as well. So working with other data and measurement providers to measure other outcomes that brands might want to measure across their CTV campaigns. So I think it's a really exciting time. I'm really glad that I've joined the business and kind of ready to get going and to kind of really push out Targetcast.
Fantastic. Good to hear. Well, if you see the podcast before, we like to round up with a few quick fire questions. So number one, what's your favorite brand in the CTV media or ad tech space, apart from obviously Audience Store?
Yeah, obviously. Apart from Audience Store, there's loads out there, who I've worked with or who are doing really great stuff. But one a kind of previous client who I was working with at Samsung, and I think they're doing great work, and that's StackAdapt, the DSP. I think they're in a really, really tough kind of environment. You've got two huge behemoths like DV360 and the Trade Desk. And I think they've been really kind of, really smart in kind of how they've had to kind of like navigate and grow really this really tough ecosystem. And I think, they're kind of building out, similar to kind of what spoke about with Targetcast, that need to build out partnerships. I think they've created some really kind of key relationships with some big publishers. Like, I think they've got Channel 4 onboarded. I think, they're one of the only 2 DSPs that work with Channel 4. I think they've got a good partnership with Disney as well. So, you can see that they're actually building out, really smartly to kind of really make themselves stand out. But, and, they're a great bunch of people as well. So, I was, working regularly with the inventory partnerships team over there, and they're a really good bunch of guys as well. So, I think they're doing a great job.
Very good, very good. And an individual in the space you'd like to give a shout out to, and why?
Yeah, well, I've got a couple here. So two people I've worked with. So one, it was over from Freewill, and that's Stephanie Briek. And I just think she's a leader now. So she's the leader of the UK international demand team over at Freewill/Audience Express. And I kind of worked with Steph back when I started in 2018, I think, and she was in a sales role, but kind of transitioned to kind of being the team lead. And I think she managed that transition seamlessly. And there was like a saying, "Get stuff done," but it wasn't stuff; it was something else. And that was the mantra that we had, and it had come from Sticky Ads, and Sticky Ads had been acquired by Freewill. And Steph was like the embodiment of like just get stuff done. And I think that's kind of a big thing that sticks with me. And I catch up with Steph regularly, and it's great to see how her and the team are doing over at Freewill. And the second person's Chris Kleinschmidt. So Chris, he was my boss at Samsung. He recruited me into his team. He'd set up this new programmatic team. And he's just like the most positive, happy, no matter how tough things get. He's always there, kind of smiling and positive. And that kind of stuck with me as well. So, no matter how tough things get, just keep smiling, he's always going to kind of be sorted out and be resolved. And so those two people kind of made a big impact, and I kind of get stuff done and keep smiling.
Very good. I don't know if we need to do the last question now, because it's what's the number one lesson learned in your career? I don't know if it's one of those two or.
Well, I've got some general career advice. Speak to I do like kind of if I get asked like what career advice would you give someone, and I just think this is like for more so in digital and programmatic than say what it was before with TV. Is that you've just always, and I use the surfing analogy, that you've always just got to keep looking at what that next wave is behind you and kind of work out. At the moment, we're riding this kind of programmatic CTV kind of wave, but, what waves coming behind that you might need to kind of look at and get ready to ride on? Is it going to be, retail media? We've got a podcast, so we haven't mentioned AI yet. So, what AI, all those kind of waves that are coming behind you. So I think, to use a surfing analogy, you've got to kind of ride the wave that you're on, but, keep an eye behind you and look at that next wave that's coming on, because you might need to hop on that.
Absolutely. I think that's some great advice, Paul, from somebody who's had a very distinguished career so far and seems to be well positioned to take Targetcast forward for us in the future.
Oh, thank you. Cheers, man.
No worries. Very good having you on. Thanks for your time, and we'll catch up soon.
Great. See you soon. Thank you.
Cheers, Paul.